And welcome to those of you who are joining for the Southern Voices Network for Peacebuilding 2021 virtual conference and our conference. My name is Thompson Ayodele. I'm the director of the Initiative for Public Policy Analysis, a public think tank based in Lagos, Nigeria. IPPA is a founding member of Southern Voices Network for Peacebuilding. We are delighted to have you all for this session titled Beyond Silencing the Gun, Reflection on Challenges and Recommendations for the Way Forward. This session promises to be a very engaging discussion, and we welcome the participation of you, the audience. We are live tweeting today's event and taking questions online and via email. To join us, please tweet your question and tag Africa Up Close using the hashtag Peacebuilding in Africa or SVNP. You may also email us your question at africa@wilsoncenter.org. Let me provide a context for this session. The goal of this session is to examine African Union continent-wide campaign titled Silencing the Gun by 2020, and to reflect upon the way forward for building sustainable peace in Africa. Specifically, this session will examine the context. We examine the extent to which the Silencing the Gun initiative has been successful, as well as its major roadblock. It will also identify the key challenges faced by peace-building efforts on the continent more broadly, and make recommendations for concrete steps forward toward silencing the gun and achieving a more sustainable peace in Africa. Today's, this session, we have two women from Africa who will be speaking on this topic. And both speakers will be speaking in their personal capacities. So I would like to introduce our speakers. The first is Ms. Ayato and Ms. Oge. Each of them has been asked to focus their remarks on the key points and findings from their chapter contributions, especially on the policy recommendations they provided. Each speaker will be offered 7 minutes of initial remark. After both speakers have spoken, we will have a 2 minutes remark from Dr. Awolish and Dr. Matembo. We will have a Q&A, which is moderated. As a reminder, you can tweet your question, hashtag Africa Up Close, and using the hashtag Peacebuilding in Africa and SVNP, or email your question to africa@wilsoncenter.org. Our first speaker is Ms. Ayato. Again, she will be speaking in her personal capacity. She is the head of the AU Commission, AUDA Nepal Coordination Unit in the cabinet of chairperson of the commission. She has over 26 years of professional experience, which includes 16 years at the AU Commission in Addis Ababa. Her expertise mainly focuses on peace, security, and development matters in Africa, in particular, as regards policy analysis and development. Previous to her current position, she held various positions at the AU in the area of peace and security, most notably operations manager for Silencing the Guns program, senior analyst at the Continental Early Warning System, and expert in support of peace, AU Peace and Security Council Secretariat. Our academic background consists in a Master of Science in Global Affairs and Master in International Relations. Ms. Ayato will be focusing on 3 key questions. 1, to what extent has the AU Silencing the Gun initiative has been successful? 2, what are the top 3 challenges to silencing the gun 3, what are the three concrete steps that has been taken to silencing the gun and to more effectively address conflict and insecurity while enhancing peace in Africa? Over to you, Ms. Ayato, for your 7 minutes remarks.
Thank you very much, Thompson. Good afternoon, colleagues, brothers and sisters, and thank you so very much for the opportunity. And I mean, it is really a timely event. Within 7 minutes, talking about silencing the guns is really a big challenge. So as you said, I might have to focus on very few issues.
Yes.
Well, maybe from the start, I may want to say that the Silencing the Guns campaign is a process. Silencing the guns is a process and have been a process in Africa for a long time. We've had other efforts before, the Make Peace Happen campaign in 2010. And since its establishment in 1963, we have been trying to silence the guns across the continent. As long as guns are loud in in one corner of the continent, we are not at peace. So this is what we are looking at, the future that we are looking at. But like I was saying, it's a process. So 2013, when our member states set the objective in Agenda 2063 to silence the guns by 2020. Remember, it was in 2013, and we are in 2021. For the first time, the issue of silencing the guns became on our instruments, in our documents, mainstreamed in across all issue area, all developmental areas, as well as political peace, security, peace building, conflict prevention, etc. Really mainstreamed. So to the extent that during the decade, 2013 to 2021, let's say 2023, we have seen all stakeholders understanding how their own efforts, their own activities, whatever activities, regardless of the sector in which they are active, how did it fit into the promotion of peace on the continent? And in this respect, I would like to say that we have seen different sectors mobilizing, from the private sector to the governance sector, civil societies, international organizations, and etc., have been mobilized to raise awareness on the idea that there should be some appropriation, ownership of the agenda for peace by all African citizens and beyond the continent. And in this, in that sense, I would like to say that we have made really a very big impact during these years. Also, looking at the instruments, the institutional framework and the normative frameworks of that is contained in the African peace and security architecture, we have seen an acceleration of the efforts, the mediation effort, both the mediation efforts and peace support operations on the ground. We have seen, we have also seen a lot of interest in the use of other stakeholders, such as what we call the panel of the wise. Some track tree type of diplomacy, where you have had a lot of civil society organization learning to work with a governmental organization like the AU and intergovernmental organization like the EU, which have been really lacking in the previous year. Maybe I would like to stop a little bit on this because this has been really an innovation in the African Union, whereby the idea of getting citizens involved in the work of the African Union have become have attained some reality, I would say. The Peace and Security Council itself have adopted what they call the Livingstone formula. This formula allows civil society organizations to come and address Peace and Security Council, giving their views from their perspective and their analysis on the issues that we have on the ground in different corners, the different types of conflicts that we are facing, and making recommendations. And you would agree with me that this is something that is really critical. If we look at the strategy and the idea behind involving our citizens in our work. That said, when you look at what the Silencing the Guns have produced, I mean, the Peace and Security Council adopted what is called the Roadmap for Silencing the Guns. This roadmap, very quickly, is a document that that displays the dynamics of the conflicts we have on the continent, from their sources to their triggers and to the response that needs to be brought. And in this, within this framework, you have issues of governance, issues of developmental issues, issues of climate change, etc., including, of course, the proliferation of small and light weapons and peaceful settlements of conflict. And Peace and Security Council comes to the realization that domestic resource mobilization, ability to invest in developmental sectors, the betterment of our governance systems, the capacitation of our governance systems, etc., are all part of the efforts to bring about peace. One will not go without the other. So this comprehensive vision is what I would say have been the biggest success in the effort to silencing the guns on the continent. And I guess what I'm saying is that we should continue in that direction. I see my 7 minutes have gone faster than I had expected. I apologize for that, but I will leave the rest of my intervention during the questions. And thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ayato. This is a very explosive session, and I'm sure the audience will have a lot of questions for you. Again, I need to remind the audience that both speakers in this session are speaking in their personal capacities. Once again, thank you, Ms. Ayato. Our second speaker is Ms. Oge. She is the director of the West Africa program at the U.S. Institute of Peace, where she leads programming on Nigeria, coastal West Africa, Lake Chad Basin, and Gulf of Guinea. In this position, she provides leadership and oversees the design and implementation of projects to mitigate violent conflict, promote inclusion, and strengthening community-oriented security by partnering with policymakers, civic leaders, and organizations. Her thematic focus is on governance and democracy, U.S. Africa relations, and civil society development in sub-Saharan Africa. We have asked Ms. Oge to focus her remarks on 3 key questions, namely, 1, what has been the impact of COVID-19 on conflict management and peace building efforts in Africa? 2, what are 2 to 3 policy recommendations for how international actors, including United States, can more effectively support AU silencing the gun effort, in particular, and Africa continental conflict management and peace building efforts in general? The last one, what are the key areas for cooperation and key challenges or areas for focus? Over to you, Ms. Oge, for your contribution.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ayodele. And thank you, my sister Ayato, for laying the framework for this conversation. I think, as you all rightfully pointed out, this is a really, really important conversation. And I am thankful to the Wilson Center for organizing this session and inviting me to present. I'm going to try to keep my comments very brief. Hopefully I will not use up the 7 minutes, because I think that this is a conversation that really requires a lot of discussion. And so I'm really looking forward to the Q&A session for this. I think the COVID-19 crisis and the response that we've seen over the past year in many ways has exacerbated or is exacerbating the underlying root causes of conflict, particularly when we think about areas of inequality. You know, in certain instances, we have seen where some governments have used their response, have exploited the crisis in furthering their own agendas. We've seen where they have used the response to the crisis to exploit, and sometimes you have security agencies that are supposed to be enforcing COVID-19 lockdown restrictions that have also committed human rights violations. These are examples, and there are pockets of examples here and there. But in all of this, we've also seen where there have been opportunities where civil society actors and community actors have used this as an opportunity to also advance peace. They've been able to quickly pivot their activities to providing, if it's mask in personal protective gear in certain communities, and in building relationships as well between communities. So while we have seen challenges that the COVID-19 crisis has brought, we've also seen opportunities as well. And I think in all of that, as peace builders and in the field of conflict management, it has given us an opportunity to really think about adaptive peace building. How do we adapt our processes to ensure that we are responding to the needs of citizens? How do we adopt our processes and our peace building programs in an environment where in some cases there is growing or deepening mistrust between communities and government? And I think these are areas where, when I think about how the COVID-19 crisis has impacted peace building and conflict resolution or conflict management, it gives us an opportunity to think about how we reflect, to think about peace building, as Ayato mentioned, as a process. This is a process where we have to learn, and this is the opportunity that it has provided for us. And, you know, I was really happy when Ayato spoke about, you know, the Silencing the Guns initiative, because really over the last year, we've seen a rise in local conflicts on the continent. Regardless of the call for a global ceasefire, we actually saw local conflicts increase from all the way from Mozambique up to Nigeria. We saw an increase in in violent conflicts. So for many, while the idea of silencing the guns might seem very ambitious, it is ambitious, but it is essential. It is essential because any sort of reduction in violent conflict in any part of the continent helps in ensuring that we can see a positive development. And I think in that regard, building on the idea that she mentioned about the holistic approach that is being taken in terms of recommendations, really thinking about how we sincerely invest in peace at the local level would be a recommendation moving forward. How do we ensure that community members, that citizens actually see the idea of silencing the guns as not just a slogan that is discussed in Addis or by political elites in the capital cities of their different countries, but something that community members actually own. And we see examples across the board and on the continent where there are local community structures, local peace building structures that communities have put together. How do we work together to build these structures, to support these structures, to ensure that we prioritize prevention? Because at the end of the day, we have to be able to think about how we prevent conflict, how we strengthen the structures that can help us ensure that the guns do not get into the communities in the first place. So prioritizing our investment in peace. Throughout this, the last few days of the conference, I've also heard about, the importance of our youth on the continent. How do we leverage on the strengths that young people have on the continent? Because these young voices on the continent will be very instrumental in ensuring that this message of silencing the guns actually gets to the right to the right communities and the right constituencies that we are trying to reach, that the governments are trying to reach with this message. And unfortunately, this is where you also see the disconnect between government and citizens, because it is difficult if citizens do not trust the governments, or in some cases, the same governments that are asking you to silence the guns are also turning the guns against their own citizens. So there is the challenge there. How do we get people to a table where governments understand that you need youth voices? We need to be able to understand where these young people operate in the spaces that they operate, the spaces on Twitter, on social media, that are not the non-traditional spaces. How do we start building partnerships to understand them? Because sometimes the things we do not understand are the things that threaten us the most. But in this environment, you need those avenues to be able to push this message of silencing the guns. And I think for the international community, when it comes to issues on Africa, at least in the US, we see a lot of bipartisan support. We see that across the board, there is support for issues on the continent. So being able to leverage on that goodwill to ensure that we can advance the discussion for peace building, advance the opportunities that exist would be another recommendation. But I would also mention that COVID-19 actually, in many ways, expose the gaps that exist across the board, not only on the continent, in the US as well. It exposed the gaps across the board. And I think it has really provided us an opportunity to face this conversation from a place of humility and from a place of true partnership, and understanding that even sometimes the best laid plans may not necessarily work out. So that comes that idea of being adaptive in our peace building, being adaptive in the way we implement our policies, to understand that we shouldn't always just look at the slogan itself, but we should think beyond the plans, because the plans will only be a starting point to ensuring that we build sustainable peace. So I will stop there and look forward to the questions and the discussions on this.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Oge, for your wonderful contribution. Now, there's going to be some perspective to this discussion, and our next speaker, who is given 3 minutes for a brief responsive remark, is Dr. Matembo. So Dr. Matembo is Executive Director of Institute for Global Dialogue, an independent foreign policy think tank based in Tshwane, Victoria, South Africa. IGD is also a member of Southern Voices Network for Peace Building. Over to you, Dr. Matembo.
Excellent. No, thank you very much, colleagues. I think I've enjoyed listening into the discussion, and I think what I'm going to do is just quickly jump into where it sort of ended off, because what I'm seeing is this approach of not, so moving away from a reactive approach, moving towards a more sustainable approach, which is more proactive. So really a much more all-encompassing approach of peace building, of building resilience, but also of building resilience not only at a national level, but at a local level, but then also building resilience, I think, at a regional level. So I think if we're able to sort of focus on all those layers, then it takes us to this approach, which our two speakers have also then, been touching on, is how do we build a much more sustainable peace? And rather than reacting to conflicts, as and when they emerge, but that the focus is much more on a positive focus on building resilience within community level, of leveraging from the structures that are already existing. Some of those structures, traditional structures, but leveraging on what is already there in society and ensuring that those structures that are there for actually taking forward the processes of peace building, that they're functioning properly, that they're able to detect, way ahead of time, when issues are about to bubble over. Because I think what's going to be important, obviously moving forward, and I think both of our speakers really did touch on this, is what's going to be important is that you're building sustainable solutions to these issues. So you're not putting out flames as and when those flames actually emerge, but rather what you are doing is you are saying, what will it take in an all-encompassing way in all sectors, whether it's in economy, whether we are thinking about social welfare and a whole range of areas that we're thinking on. But what will it actually take in a comprehensive approach that will ensure long-lasting peace in our societies? And I think if we're doing that, then it's a much more sustainable approach towards peace building efforts on the continent, rather than what we have sometimes been guilty of, which is allowing situations to fester, allowing the root causes of conflict to actually fester for a long time and then explode. And then it becomes much more expensive in terms of resources, in terms of time, in terms of everything, to actually go back and try to rebuild society. So I think for me, my contribution is really around that. But I think I'm glad that both speakers have actually touched on those matters, because I think if we focus on those, then our interventions will be more sustainable in future.
Thank you very much. Our next comment is supposed to be provided by Dr. Habra. I guess, is he here? Dr. Habra?
Thompson, he is not in, but I suggest you go ahead with the Q&A, and if he does join us, you can give him his 3 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Matembo, for your wonderful 3 minutes response. I have a couple of questions here for our speakers, and Dr. Matembo can also join. This question is from Ms. Helen to Ms. Ayato. The question goes, what has been the greatest challenge in achieving the objective of silencing the gun in Africa? And how has COVID-19 impacted on this campaign? And what are the strategies being adopted to ensure the AU remain on course? Ms. Ayato.
Thank you very much, Helen, for the question. Wow, the greatest challenges, there have been a million challenges. Each one as hard as the other one. But may I say this? The silencing the guns, in the vision of the silencing the guns effort, there are many different stakeholders who have a responsibility and have a role to play. Even let's put the citizens aside. So what you have on the continent is a constellation of different types of conflicts happening. It ranges from terrorism to crimes against humanity, to transnational crime and all types of, and then you have other conflict, more localized, like the conflicts you see across the Sahel, all the way to the Horn of Africa with the herders, the traditional conflict between herders and agricultural community. You have in Africa is one of the places where you have the largest numbers of refugees, IDPs. So the issues are really many, and but then focusing on the way forward, once we have understood that you cannot enforce peace. You cannot enforce peace. You always have this expression of peace enforcement mission to the ground when you send. How do we enforce peace? Peace is you need to ensure that people take ownership, take ownership of the ideals of peace, so that in their calculation, their action, peace has more dividend than engaging into conflict. So now you have a setting like the African Union that is made of members, that is made of governments primarily. Although we acknowledge that there have been a progress where our member states have opened doors to other stakeholders, we still have to acknowledge that even structurally, the AU, for example, is not yet structured to engage into a continent-wide campaign such as the Silencing the Guns campaign by itself. Like our sister Oge said, it is the local communities. These campaigns, peace campaigns, need to trickle down to the communities. I mean, it is not, and most of the time, these conflicts happen outside our capitals. It is always outside the capital. So if you focus, of course, we have urban issues, but if you focus the action of silencing the guns within governmental, within the realm of government action, well, I'm not sure that this is going to yield the results that we want. What I mean by that is that we know the setting of our countries. Most of the time, our largest population in the continent is a rural population. And we lack infrastructure, we lack a number of things that we call, okay, the sources of conflict, even sometimes it becomes triggers to conflicts. But then, if you look at the endowment of African society in terms of mediating conflicts, we will see that most of our societies have local structures that needs to be involved into all these processes. It is not sustainable to have something like the Dadaab IDP camp in Kenya. No wonder Kenya want to dismantle it, but. And when we, if I come back to what my sister Oge said about involving the youth, that the youth are 3/4 of our population. And yet again, things are happening. It is very challenging to get them involved into the mediation process, etc., etc. Yet they are a real source of support for our regional organizations, from the ECOWAS, the SADC, etc., to continental organizations like the AU and other think tanks that they can feed, and they can also engage into peace building activities like we have seen in many places. So really, from what I saw, the most challenging task we had was to find a solution, or to find a way to get our citizens, civil society organizations, think tanks, etc., really get involved in the work that we were doing. It is working, it is progressing very well, but the problem is it is not progressing as fast as we would have wanted it to, because the AU in the first place was not built to, was not structured to engage in such campaign. There are institutions that are specialized into engaging into campaigns, into mobilizing either political will or financial resources and all types of resources. And also, we have seen in certain places, the private sector, through their corporate social responsibility, also taking the lead in certain areas where they will now address really the more how do you say that, the real root causes, issues, developmental issues, educational issues, etc. We have seen these kinds of partnerships also happening. The last thing I would like to raise as a challenge is that despite the efforts that have been made to ensure that all actors on the African continent engaging in peace building, peace, in the promotion of peace on the continent, harmonize their vision, have the same, not maybe the same strategy, or at least the same understanding of the situation. But you see a sort of marketplace where you have so many stakeholders on the ground that you have sometimes conflicting agendas happening in conflict areas on the continent. So it has really been a challenge for us. I mean, for the African Union, for example, and the regions to put the agendas forward. A few years ago, you only had 5 rebel groups in the Sahel. This is less than 10, about 10 years ago. Today, you have about 20 of them, and even more. And the dynamic of the situation is increasing, is changing. You can see even the nature of conflicts changing, and our organization needs to follow or even anticipate these dynamic shifts that are happening, to be able to play a specific role, and to, I would say, involve other actors in the promotion of peace. And I think these are the challenges that I would underline now, and also and a beginning of strategy that I will get to propose for the moment.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ayato, for your wonderful contribution once again. I have a lot of questions here. The next question is also from Mrs. Helen to Mrs. Oge. It said, the question goes, thank you for recognizing the ability of local peace builder to shift and adapt to COVID-19 context. However, one of the challenges is that some of these local mechanisms are not linked to national and regional peace building architecture. How best can this linkage be improved to ensure that such efforts are acknowledged and recognized by governments? Over to you, Ms. Oge.
Thank you very much, Thompson, and thank you, Helen, for that question. I think it's a very important question, ensuring that these types of linkages are created so that initiatives are not done in isolation, because over time, that is what we've seen across in many communities across the continent. Well-intentioned initiatives often do not end up turning into sustainable change. So one of the things that we actually do at USIP is that our work seeks to, first of all, identify where the gaps are. And this is a work that I've been doing in many communities for several years, where the gaps exist specifically. Do not generalize, really identify where the gaps are, then identify who the individuals are as change agents that can help ensure that those connections are made. Because when these connections aren't made, when these linkages aren't made, we end up seeing plans that are replicated. Because at the end of the day, you have initiatives that are at the local level that are some very often low-cost initiatives. And then you read a national plan that is a complete replication of something that is already happening at the local level, and a plan with a budget that is probably that will cost 3 times more than what you see happening at the local level. So I think really the first step is really and sincerely identifying the gaps. And I know that, when we see identifying the gaps, it's not that easy, because a lot of the environments that we work in, a lot of the environments on the continent, there are already structural challenges there that make it difficult for these types of linkages to happen, that make it difficult for these types of discussions to even take place, that strategically exclude the voices of local actors. Because again, there is a structure in place, and these local actors sometimes are not invited to the table. But that's why this is a process. I'm an eternal optimist when it comes to conversations about Africa. And I believe that peace building is a long-term process. It's a process that we have to work on. It's a process that we have to adapt and learn as we go along the way. And I think that there is increasing awareness now that the voices of citizens, that the voices of local actors are critical to building sustainable peace, are critical to advancing the type of change that we want to see on the continent. And I think we have to be able to think about how we leverage and build on these new openings, these opportunities that we see. How do we seize the moment now? And I think this is where, these types of conversations, once you identify the actors and once you try to create the right linkages, these are the types of conversations that we should be having now. I know there really isn't a straight answer to that, because as I said, a lot of these are structural challenges. The structures in which a lot of these organizations operate make it difficult for them to engage. But there are windows of opportunities in some environments. I will give one practical example from some work in West Africa, where we've seen that in engagements with state governments, that they now begin to understand their role in promoting, in working with communities to promote community-led initiatives that can help prevent conflict. Because after a while, they've begun to realize that they were spending a lot of money and not really getting results. So I think for progress to be made in an area like this, it's a time for frank conversation. It's a time for those who are in decision-making positions to admit where the gaps are. And that's where, I really like the point that my sister Satu made, where she said, this is what the AU is structured for, and this is where the gaps are. Like, this is a time for us to really identify where those gaps are and think about who the right actors are that can help us leverage the opportunities that we see moving forward.
Thank you very much, Ms. Oge. Before I call on, I ask Dr. Matembo if he has any comments to make as well. Let me ask you, Ms. Oge, do you see, you mentioned about involvement of local actors. In the course of your work, do you see a role for traditional rulers as one of the key actors, local key actors in enhancing peace in various communities?
Yes, so there are roles for traditional rulers, but this also, it varies from community to community and also varies on the conflict as well. In some communities, traditional rulers may be adding to the conflict. So I think that's where it also goes to understanding the analysis and understanding the key actors in the conflict from the very beginning. There is a general consensus that it's important to include local voices. It's important that traditional rulers and traditional actors have a role to play, but it's also important to understand the context of the conflict in which you're engaging in and which actors are spoilers or which actors can also help progress the work. So I think, to answer your question, there is a role for traditional rulers, but it is also important to understand the context of the conflict. Because in some communities as well, people have said, if I take the example of the rise in conflicts between farmers and pastoralists, many have said that in the past, traditional rulers played a very important role there because they knew when new people came into the communities. They were able to ensure that there were structures put in place. There were traditional peace-building mechanisms that they used to try to avoid or prevent these types of conflict and also mitigate them when they arise. So in those types of instances, you see that there is a need to engage those types of voices in the conversation. But as I said, it's important to understand the conflict, who the main actors are, to ensure that you do not bring in spoilers to the discussion. So it's really important to understand the environments in which we operate and do not generalize on who stakeholders are that we should engage in every conversation.
Dr. Matembo, do you have any comments or contributions?
No, I think at this stage, the main point for me is that that involvement of multiple actors. I think what you have, let's say at a regional level, you also have situations where societies are, begin to lose trust in the regional mechanisms of peace building, whether it be SADC, whether it be ECOWAS, or any of the sub-regional communities or economic communities. So in that sense, I think what's important is to always move with a multiple track diplomacy approach so that people in the regions that these authorities are residing also do not develop the sentiment that these bodies merely are there to protect the executive authorities of the various states. So, take for an example, let's say the Kingdom of Eswatini, where you've had 2 missions of SADC that have gone there to speak to different actors within the society. But I think also what you're starting to get from, civil society actors is the question of how sincere are those bodies? Are they essentially there to protect the executive authorities in the various countries, or are they there to actually facilitate an all-inclusive dialogue? So I think that's something that has to be consistently there, in that when thinking about peace building efforts, it is not only at a state level, that these initiatives are being led, but that you are always having an inclusive approach that involves multiple tracks of diplomacy. And in the example that you mentioned, I mean, that can go right down to traditional authorities, but obviously depending on the particular context of the situation on the ground.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matembo. The next question is, either of the two speakers or Dr. Matembo can answer this question. Two US and EU mantra comes to mind despite the support for Africa. One, words versus action. Demonstrate true resolve or commitment. Progress must be made. Two, no longer interested in supporting forever wars. For instance, Mali exit from Mali. So the question is this not a unique opportunity for African paradigm shift to own the problem of conflict and to take back Africa and their own identity? Question for any of our speakers. Hello?
Maybe just to jump in on the opportunity and the paradigm shift there. I think what's really going to be important, this dichotomy of words versus actions, I think it's really also as African stakeholders, I think we need to be much more serious about the domestic mobilization of resources towards peace building efforts. We've seen so many situations on the continent where there is an agreement, to facilitate or to speak to various sides. However, the challenge remains around resourcing of those particular missions. And I think this is a serious barrier and also calls into question Africa's own level of commitment to resolving, conflicts. Because, you can't be in a situation as a continent and as continental bodies taking yourselves seriously. If you say, yes, we want to mediate, or yes, we want to get involved, but then at the same time, in order to get involved, you're still waiting on the support of external actors just to get started. Now, this does not mean that there isn't a role for external actors. There's always a role for external actors. But I think we will be taken much more seriously if we are serious about mobilizing domestic resources, get started, take decisions and get started, and then mobilize external support where there is a need. Because we've got examples where Africans say, yes, we want to get involved, but we don't have the resources. Now, what that creates is it creates an opening for other interests to actually muddy the waters at times. So I think this issue of resource mobilization is something that's going to be very important moving forward. But at the same time, it does not negate from the need of external partnerships.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matembo. There's one nagging question here which one of our listeners sent to us. The question goes, silencing the gun requires addressing the supply side of arms flowing to the continent, as we heard in the earlier session. Could any of the speakers address what concrete action that can be taken to better address the supply side of flow of arms into Africa?
Can I?
Yes, go ahead.
Ogie, you want to go? You want to go? Well, I would like to answer to this question, taking on board also the previous question that I was trying to better understand. One thing we haven't touched on yet is the developmental part of the promotion of peace. And in that, one thing that is happening on the continent is the establishment of the continental free trade area. When you look at the continental free trade area, you have a number of protocols that are going to help with the control of our borders, cross-border trading, etc. Weapons come in Africa via our seaports, our various ports, right? So establishing the various protocols and enforcing them actually has somehow become one of the top agenda items in the Silencing the Guns program, whereby we have seen institutions specializing in cross-border cooperation, transnational trade, etc., partnering with peace and security institutions within the AU and the REX to now facilitate or to help with the control of in terms of import of small arms and light weapons. This was a way to bring you back to the comprehensive nature and necessary linkages and synergizing the different types of the different issues and bringing them together in a more coherent manner. How do you? Of course, Africa is not the first producer of weapons, and we do have producers of weapons, traditional weapons on the continent, even a little bit more sophisticated. But addressing that issue will go beyond signing the various protocols that we have, but it will also go through incapacitating the peace enforcement agencies we have on the ground, but also it goes through very tough laws that does not allow, the legislation also have to evolve in some manner. While one thing we could say also in this regard is that it is not because there's a weapon sitting here that somebody will pick it up to shoot at people. There is another problem. So whether it's not because weapons are sold that they are being bought, purchased, there is a reason for that. So I think that here also we are going back to the structural causes of conflict, which will now push people to try to the various groups, and including governments, to increase their military capacity. And so in this regard, I think this is the contribution I wanted to bring, and maybe my sister Oge could complement here.
If I could just...
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you so much. If I could just add, just a few more points on that too as well. And I'm glad that you mentioned the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, because, at the end of the day, even as these conversations happen at the regional level and at the continental level, the role of the member states as well to ensure that there is good governance within their individual states will also go a long way in addressing some of these issues, because conversations can happen at the regional level, they can happen at the continental level, but if those structural issues are not addressed at the country level, it makes it very difficult to think about how guns will be silenced, because people will always try to find ways, those who have been discriminated against, those who have been excluded from the process, those who go their processes of inequality that also, feed into driving conflict. Though individuals who have been left out of the process, and even governments themselves, will find ways to use these weapons. And very often, we mistake peace building with security promotion. And I see that time and time and time again. And to that point of, you can't enforce peace, where people say, okay, we're bringing in weapons because we want to keep the peace. Or we're buying new vehicles for police officers to patrol the roads, and this is our way to protect and keep people safe. When for a fraction of that, you could invest and build structures or strengthen existing structures in the community that can ensure that these weapons do not make their way into the hands of young people and into the hands of those who would use it for violent means. So while conversations happen at the regional and the continental level, it has to be complemented by the member states too as well. And so the whole idea of ensuring that there is effective governance at the national level, at the state level, at the country level, really contributes to ensuring that the aspirations at the continental or the regional level to silence the guns are met.
Thank you very much. Dr. Matembo, do you have any? Dr. Matembo, are you there? Okay. Next question goes to Ms. Oge. On adaptive peace building. Sometimes institutions and bureaucracy are heavy-footed and slow to change direction. Yet COVID demands that we adapt our strategies and approaches. How do we create conditions, or how do we facilitate the ability of international and regional organizations to pivot and conduct adaptive peace building that is more responsive to the situation on the ground?
Thank you so much for that question. And I think this is a new and ongoing conversation, because COVID-19 really pushed us as peace builders, as peacemakers, pushed a lot of people out of their comfort zones to realize that the things that people used to be able to do before, go into communities, to work with communities, to broker peace agreements, these things you can't do anymore. So you have to think outside of the box. You have to think about new ways to get things done. And even now with the COVID-19 crisis, we see that, and some things that we're also hearing from local actors on the ground, that when it comes to funding, it seems that a lot of funding is now moved towards health programming and other forms of programming, which is important. And that also provides an opportunity for us to think creatively. How do we adapt the idea of peace building within a health development project or an education project or a project on climate change, knowing fully well that when we talk about conflict, that the drivers of conflict are varied. The drivers of conflict, they're a range of things that contribute to conflict. So this gives us an opportunity to advance the conversations that I see that are happening now at the international level, to think about this idea of adaptive peace building, to understand that this is not something where we can just say, oh yes, let's adapt peace building, let's move. That this is a process where we have to learn. It's a learning process. And at a point, as peace builders, as the international community, we have to get to a point where we are somewhat comfortable with that level, with a level of uncertainty. Because very often we are bounded by the plans that we develop. Vision 2020, Vision 2023. We come up with these big numbers about plans that we've set for ourselves and specific goals that we've set out to try to achieve. Yes, those can be guides, but the reality in the world, the reality that COVID-19 and the crisis has opened our eyes to, is that we have to be ready to think, we have to be flexible, we have to be ready to accept that there is a level of uncertainty in what we're trying to do. And in getting somewhat comfortable in that environment of uncertainty, it opens our eyes to new creative ideas on how we can get things done. It opens our eyes to creative ways to advance the type of change that we hope to see. So again, the entire discussion on adaptive peace building, which builds off of years of conversations on adaptive leadership, these are conversations that are still ongoing. These are conversations that actors on the continent, at the community level, at the state level, in different civil society organizations, this is an opportunity. This is an opening to actually bring in some new ideas, to feed in some new ideas when we talk about peace building and conflict management and what that really means in reality. When we talk about peace on the continent, have we really stepped back to ask ourselves, what does peace really mean to someone at a community level? Are we using our own measurements of peace to think about what peace should mean to them? What does silencing the gun mean to a woman who lives in a remote community who is concerned about the safety of her child if she has to send her child to school and she's concerned that that child might be kidnapped? What does silencing the guns mean to that individual? So there is a huge opportunity for us here. There's a huge opportunity for Africa here and a lot of actors in this space to really inform the conversations and really tweak the thinking of several individuals about what peace really means and how we can adapt our processes and adapt our programming to advance peace and reach for the type of change that we would like to see. But there is that opening now for that discussion, and there's some practical ways and practical examples on this too.
Thank you very much, Ms. Oge. If I may follow up with you on that. Okay, go ahead, Dr.
Okay, thank you. When Ms. Oge was talking, it came, there is let me be a little bit anecdotal. A few days ago, I was reading the newspaper and I see a communique from Al-Shabaab, who is calling to the Somali population not to get vaccinated with AstraZeneca because it causes blood clot, etc. And I was thinking, Al-Shabaab issuing a communique about vaccination, and they even say it kills people. Al-Shabaab saying that vaccines are killing people. Okay, at first I was smiling, but then I realized that Al-Shabaab is trying to gain more legitimacy. I mean, getting involved, and the next thing you know, Al-Shabaab will be vaccinating people in its camps. Certainly, I don't know how they will be able to, I guess the way they are finding weapons, the same way they would be able to procure vaccines. You would agree with me. So Al-Shabaab is trying to legitimize itself by giving a pronouncement on social issues, the vaccination, the wearing of masks, etc., etc. And this brings us back to the issue of the ungoverned spaces. There are too many ungoverned spaces on the continent, and that is because, well, of course, we have weaknesses in governance and so on, but it is also an issue of lack of capacity, even where certain countries would want to address these issues. It is not necessarily an issue of corruption, of diverting that prevent them to implement a policy. It is also a lack of capacity. So this is where we move towards, in my reflection, I realized that now it means that when we talked about local actors earlier, we really need to also talk about private sectors and their corporate social responsibilities as key actors, because where if a family can get vaccinated by Al-Shabaab and that the country, the government is not providing health facilities and that Al-Shabaab is providing, well, they will be more attracted to Al-Shabaab and go and get vaccinated. This is where it starts. And this is how Boko Haram is giving rice and medication and all these kinds of things that government was supposed to provide for its citizens, but it didn't, and somebody fills the gap. This is where, I just wanted to follow up on what my sister Oge said. It really triggers my memory on this Al-Shabaab issue, and really ungoverned spaces are really one of the most dangerous places in terms of letting the recruitment of our youth into or either criminal networks or terrorism, transnational crimes, but all due to the fact that no one is taking care of people in remote areas, and maybe we don't even have an idea, like you said, of what it means to them, what is important to them, and bring solution that is not adapted to their to what they will consider as being peace and being safe to strive and develop. This is the small contribution that I wanted to make to your statement, my sister.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ayato. Dr. Matembo, do you have any contribution or response or opinion?
No, at this point, I think the two speakers have covered me perfectly. Okay.
Ms. Oge, as a follow-up to your presentation, you made a very good, interesting point, which I would like to share your thought with the audience. It starts to do that we've seen government using COVID to even further their own agenda, right? So what do you think the civil service society can do to make sure that government does not use this kind of situation to further their own agenda?
I think in many ways, to respond to that question also goes back to pulling the whole notion of adaptation. How does civil society adapt its approach to meet the needs of our time today? The way civil society engages, or some civil society actors might engage today in trying to address some of this closing of civic space, they may be using the same type of tools that were used in the 1980s or the 70s, but things have changed considerably. Like over the last year alone, the last year alone, we've seen a rise in demonstrations on the continent, from things like the NSAS movement to movements that we saw in Senegal to different parts of the country. And all of these have been led by voices that are not part of traditional civil society groups. These are movements. So how are we adapting to ensure that these types of voices that are not part of traditional civil society groups or civil society organizations are also part of the discussions? Because very often these types of movements as well, government actors may not understand the way these movements engage or the way these movements operate. And for most governments, things that they do not understand, they feel threatened by, and they find ways to shut down those voices. But then when you shut down those voices, you only end up bottling up more frustration that can implode or explode into something violent. So how do we ensure that we start putting practices in place as civil society actors, traditional civil society organizations? How are these organizations reaching out to movements or social movements, especially your youth organizations, or the youth movements or regular citizens? Because something like the NSAS movement in Nigeria, you had it led by a lot of creatives, by young people who were linked to any type of organization. You had their voices on social media. You had it reach a large international audience too as well. So how do you harness those types of strengths? Because I'm sure that these types of movements that are not that, these types of social movements, there are lessons that can be learned from traditional civil society. So are civil society organizations having discussions with movements and trying to find ways to ensure that they work or they coordinate or collaborate to be able to bring government actors to the table? So again, it goes back to that point of how we adapt, how civil society organizations adapt in the current environment today to be able to address these issues. Because as we see this closing of civic space in some environments, it is concerning, because at the end of the day, even when we go past the worst of COVID, it may be difficult to reclaim these spaces that have been closed. But civil society has an opportunity now to reach across, so same thing with the different movements, and have that conversation and figure out new ways to engage governments in these types of discussions. And really, it also goes both ways from on the part of the government too.
Thank you very much, Ms. Oge. We have a limited time here, but I have a question which I will want to pose to three of you, Dr. Matembo, Ms. Ayato, Ms. Oge. We've seen youth more vibrant, more organized in social media space. However, they are not organized in political space. In your own opinion, how do you think this bridge can be bridged? Because organizing on social media space most of the time does not translate to actual reform as to what the youth actually wanted. So how can they be more participatory in political process rather than on social media space? Dr. Matembo.
Great, I like that question because last couple of days, actually, there's a statistic that I was thinking about in South Africa. Now, in South Africa, you've got about 9 million people, right? Or let me put it this way. There's 18 million people who are eligible to vote, but did not vote in the previous national elections. Now, South Africa has a relatively high participation rate when it comes to voter numbers. However, there is a trend that we should be concerned about, in a sense that there's a growing number of people that are eligible, but are not actually going to the polls. Now, out of that 18 million, 9 million of them registered, but did not go to vote. 9 million of them did not even bother to register. You would find that a lot of this cohort of these people are young people, very active on social media, despondent with, with how things are. And I think we need to adapt and speak in their language. We need to find better ways of instilling, civic education, but doing civic education in a different way. I think it's the duty then of state actors, it's the duty of civil society actors that are involved in this space. It's also the duty of the donor community that is involved in our respective countries to actually get involved and put together programs that will build, educational programs, civic educational programs that, you know, update people on how to actually change things within the system. Because I think if we let it fester, then what we will have is that over time, you will get people not participating in the formal processes that are built into the country, and they will find other ways to actually voice their displeasure at the status quo. And in the South African case, we've seen that protests can often be a catalyst for, you know, for looting, for destroying of infrastructure and things like that, which tells you that there is a lot of energy, but that energy sometimes is not directed towards the avenues that actually can, you know, instill some kind of change. I mean, you can just imagine, just if half of those voters were to vote in the next election, it's going to have a huge impact on the electoral landscape within South Africa. But I think we need to press those things. We need to inform those young people. I speak to some of these young people, and after explaining things that of how to change things, I notice that they do actually realize that no, we do have to go to the polls, even if we're unhappy, but at least let's put our X on someone and actually send a message to government. So I think that's what we need to do to get, you know, these young people involved in politics.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matembo. Ms. Oge, Ms. Ayato, any contributions to that? I mean, it's happening in various countries, and that is a very depressing situation, right? So how can we get the youth more engaged to be involved more in political space rather than be on social media alone?
Can I?
Yes, go ahead.
My sister, go ahead, no problem. Okay, let me. We during the whole of the Make Peace Happen campaign, Silencing the Guns campaign, we've had a lot of engagements with the youth, and also with the youth in particular on the areas of peace. And we saw that they have created groups, and you know, they are very, very, very active in the area of the promotion of peace. But then within the youth community, as it is for civil society organizations, I realized that very few of them know how to engage with institutions like the AU, the ECOWAS, and our regional organizations in order to influence policies. Now, and at the same time, you will see that our policy makers, our member states, genuinely say most of the time that no, we need to be able to interact. Let's have a dialogue with the youth. Let's have a dialogue with. That have been done, but the question is, what are the results? What do we see that these groups have been able? How did we help these groups to implement their vision, or to become more active? Have we been influenced by their policies and by their recommendations, by their studies, etc.? Both sides, I would say, have no very limited idea on how this interaction between governmental organizations and civil society organizations work. When I was working at the Secretariat for the Peace and Security Council, I had a delegation of civil society organizations who showed up in Addis Ababa and said, okay, the protocol says we can address Peace and Security Council. I said, okay, fine, yes, you can, but there are some, you know, there is a procedure. You can't just come in Addis Ababa and say, okay, you came to talk to council. And this sounds a very simple matter. Looks like a very simple matter, but it is not, because actually the fact that the youth and other civil society organizations, private sector, don't know how to interact with our organizations to the extent that they would influence policy, it's really, it's a bit scary if we look at the prospects of having this collaboration, cooperation, and harmony, and even to make sure that each of us know where their role is to be situated. So there is a pedagogical approach that, and since the primary responsibility for the maintenance of peace on the continent, or at least in our member states, is bestowed on our government, then there is need for a pedagogical approach to make sure that we do understand how this interaction happens and go beyond just giving a briefing to a council or something. That means we need to have more transparency in the work of our organizations, to the extent that we can anticipate, we know the agenda of our institutions. We know Peace and Security Council is going to talk about Mali next month. Civil society, we prepare our input to their reflection to that, and we send it 3 weeks before the meeting. We don't, if we come the day of the meeting, what happens? They will adopt a press statement, and that's it. So the pedagogy, do you say that in English even? But the pedagogical approach to that. Thank you, Ms. Ayato. Sorry for taking.
Thank you.
If I could,
Ms. Oge, you have 1 minute.
Yes. Just
Thank you.
A few minutes just to add on to what my sister Ayato and Dr. Matembo have already mentioned about youth. I think when we think about youth, young people on the continent today are really a picture of resilience, a strong picture of resilience, and it's important for us to view them that way, because many of them, at least those on social media who are engaging on social media today, many of them came of age in a continent that promised them that democracy was going to deliver. And many of them are living in countries where the idea of democracy that they had, that they believe, what they believe democracy is supposed to be, isn't delivering for many of them. And so you find so many of them that have found ways outside of the government to make a life for themselves, to create sources of revenue for themselves. So that's why when you go on social media, many of them have been able to launch their own private businesses on social media. So they'd rather have conversations on social media that don't have anything to do with politics, because they haven't seen anything good come out from politics.
Thank you.
So I think it's important for us to understand that starting point from where they are beginning the conversation. But we need those energies. We need the power that they bring. We need their voices. So really thinking about how we harness that strength, harness that power, and feed it into advancing peace will really contribute to really building the Africa that we want to see. So.
Thank you very much to all our speakers, Ms. Ayato, Ms. Oge, Dr. Matembo. Thank you very much for your contributions, and to you audience for joining us. And I'm unable to take some of the key points that were made during this session, and hopefully Wilson Center will be sending it to all the audience or participants. So we have one last session for just SVNP members, starting in 5 minutes. And for everyone else, thank you all for joining us this week, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Actually,
thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the speakers. This was a fantastic session. and a really, really great way to bring the 2021 annual conference for the SVNP to a close, at least the public portion of it. Couldn't have ended on a better note. We talked about the challenges, but we also identified some really, really practical ways that we can tap into what's going on into the continent to advance the agenda of silencing the guns and strengthening peace and doing peace building differently to allow us to get to that place of peace, or as Oge said so powerfully, reminding us again of why we're doing this, the AU's vision that it has laid out in Agenda 2063 that we all buy into, but also reminder the role that they play. We cannot achieve that peace that we want for the continent without youth being more centrally brought into the framework of how we move the continent forward. So thank you so much to all of you, the speakers and the audience, for your engagement. We wanted to conclude this session just with a tribute to one of the key members of the Southern Voices Network for Peacebuilding. On January 11th, 2021, we lost a dear colleague and friend of the Southern Voices Network for Peacebuilding, Francis Carnegie, who was also a founding member of the Southern Voices Network for Peacebuilding. We have felt his absence throughout this week. There's no doubt about that. All of us, over the years, Francis has been an active and very engaged actor within the Southern Voices Network for Peacebuilding. And we wanted to take a moment to dedicate this 2021 Southern Voices Network for Peacebuilding to the memory of Francis Carnegie. Francis Carnegie is remembered as a great Pan-Africanist. His deep commitment to Africa and his contributions to the Southern Voices Network for Peacebuilding are legendary. I spoke with him about Southern African Voices Network for Peacebuilding just 3 days before he passed, because it was on his mind, and I wanted to let me know that he would not be able to attend this year's conference. We thank Francis for his work and publications as a public policy fellow and later as a global fellow at the Wilson Center. I look through the contributions on the SVNP, the blogs, and other writings that he did at the Wilson Center, always pushing forward on African agency, always pushing forward on ensuring that international relations that were built with Africa would respect and acknowledge African agency. We will miss Francis Carnegie very greatly, but more importantly, we thank him for his contributions to the Wilson Center, his intellectual home whenever he was in the United States. We will miss him greatly for his engagement with the Southern Voices Network, but we commit to building on the spirit that he brought to the Southern Voices Network. His last organization before he passed, he was with the IGD in Tshwane, South Africa, and I'd like to turn the mic over for 1 minute of a tribute from Dr. Matembo to speak to the memory of Francis Carnegie, and then we'll close this off. Dr. Matembo, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Muyangwa. This really means a lot, not only to the Institute for Global Dialogue, but I think also to his family. I was speaking to his son yesterday just about some of these issues. And, you know, if there's one thing that, you know, Francis always brought, you mentioned the agency there. And Francis, in his thinking, he was always somebody who could separate the trees from the forest. He was very much a big picture thinker. And he helped us actually to navigate a lot of the complexities in international relations, but to also ensure that we always placed African agency in international relations. And that's something that we always appreciated. And he was always a bridge, obviously, between so the concept of global Africa is something that he always spoke fondly about. And I think we always enjoyed it, and he always knew how much Southern Voices Network meant to him. And so we really do appreciate the tribute that's gone to Mr. Koneke. And in our work, carrying a lot of his work forward, we're always going to emphasize, issues of regional integration, issues of continental agency, because that's something that he was very passionate about. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matembo. A great tribute to this great Pan-Africanist. And the work that we will do, hopefully will continue with his agenda. I just wanted to quickly correct myself. I said he passed on January 11th. It was actually in June, so not too long ago. So Francis, we salute you. We commit to building on your legacy and to carrying forth the good work that you did. So thank you so much to all of you. To the public, thank you for joining us in. To our speakers, thank you to you. And to my SVNP brothers and sisters, we will see you in the closed session in about 2 minutes. Thank you, and we'll see you at next year's SVNP annual conference.
Thank you.